Hi, my name's Erwin, and this is the Poetry Lighthouse podcast. Okay, so welcome. So today we're with the wonderful poet Claire Coenen. I hope I pronounced that well.
Hey, that's perfect.
And so she just wrote a wonderful book. Would you like to present your new poetry collection?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Erwin, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful for you. You've been such a light, a poetry lighthouse light, to so many, I think, poets and readers, and certainly to me. And yeah, so I'm just really glad to be in conversation with you. I've been looking forward to this. Yeah, so I have my new book here called The Beautiful Keeps Breathing. I guess now it's about a little over 2 months since it's come out. And this is a book that has been a real adventure to write and bring out into the world. And yeah, I'm excited to be able to talk about it and poetry and um yeah.
So first of all, I think not only the cover design is fantastic because it's so colorful, but also the title, I think it speaks a lot of the contents of your poems. So what inspired you in a way to give it that title to your collection?
Yeah. So I'll give a little bit of backstory to answer that question and kind of then get to the title specifically. But essentially, so I did a graduate program on theology, studying theology. Gosh, maybe like graduated from that in 2017, so a while ago. But during that time, I had the opportunity for my master's thesis to write a spiritual memoir, which was such a gift. And most people in master's programs, have to do something a lot more like intellectually rigorous. And I was not having to like dive into the library and study all these things. But I did, it was a lot of like inner diving. And I wrote a lot about in that memoir. I wrote a lot about my own experiences with grief, with mental illness, with ever since I was a kid, I've had all these questions and curiosities about God and why are we here? All these sort of big questions. And so I really got to dive into that during my time writing this kind of master's thesis. And I ended up really coming back throughout that piece of writing to these themes of beauty and breath. And I practiced yoga for a long time and have found that the breath is, kind of one of those few realities we can count on when we're alive. It's there. It's always there. And often, for me at least, it can get shallow and I can forget about it, but it's always something I can come back to. So breath was a theme that was really coming up as I was writing this. And then also the theme of beauty and beauty, in this, not in a superficial way, but sort of deep beauty. What is beauty in the most spiritual kind of poetic sense? So I actually titled this spiritual memoir master's thesis I wrote in 2017, "The Beautiful Keeps Breathing." So the title of this poetry collection was actually taken from that, and I had done a lot of prose writing, but really in the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years, I started diving into poetry. And this poetry collection came about. And actually, a number of the poems in this book are really, some of them are even like paragraphs that are taken from that spiritual memoir I wrote and then sort of reshaped into poems. So, yeah, and then the actual phrase, "the beautiful keeps breathing," appears as the last line of a poem, in the second section of the book, where I'm talking about a really painful, kind of reckoning with the loss of a friend from a violent crime. And the final couplet of that poem is, "Even in the excruciating, the beautiful keeps breathing." And that phrase, "the beautiful keeps breathing," is one that, really since 2017, I've been sort of sitting with, and has kind of been marinating inside of me. And it found the way to, to be the title of this book.
That's amazing. There's quite a number of things I was thinking about when you were saying all of this about the title, and it's all very exciting how you came up, how this has been in the back burner, but like it's been, sort of a progress. It's not something that, happened all of a sudden. Oh, how am I gonna title my
Yes.
book? It's been sort of like a work in progress for many years. Something that I found very interesting, first of all, let's start with the breathing part. I think, um, you know, when I read your poetry collection, it did feel a lot like I was meditating, and it brought so much peace of mind because of all the beautiful imagery. And I think, in a way, breathing is so essential. Sometimes when we are stressed or anxious, we are short of breath, and normally, I think most people don't breathe correctly.
Yeah.
Even I don't get to use, I don't get to breathe correctly often, and I have to remind myself I have to breathe deeply. I need to take a breath of a few seconds, because my breath sometimes is very shallow. And it tends to mess up a lot with my emotions, my mood. So breathing is really a thing that I found very interesting about mental health. And I think a lot of people might benefit a lot from, trying to correct that part of the breathing part. So it is essential, not just for us, but all human beings and all creatures as well. We all breathe. It's essential for living. So first of all, I wanted to say that that was a very clever way to approach this collection as a sort of meditation. Something I found very interesting is the process or in which you have come up with the poems, because you said that you wrote your thesis basically, or your memoir, um, and from it you sort of transformed it into poetry, well, the ideas and stuff, but some chunks you kept them sort of almost the same way it was in its prosaic form. So it's very interesting how, and this is an exercise I try to do sometimes with in when I teach creative writing, and it's to write whatever comes to your mind. Normally it comes out in prose. It doesn't, poetry doesn't always come off the top of your head. So, and once you have, the prose chunk, you can break it up and sort of, transform it to create a poem out of it. So
Yes.
that's a very inventive way to utilize the things that you've worked with before, and you want to turn them into something else. So I think that was a very
Yes.
nice thing. Um,
Yes, and I completely agree with both your point about breathing, and the practice of just sort of allowing the free writing, the flowing. And I think there's so much too. You have to write your way to something that is kind of distilled and then ready to share with the world. It's like I have written so much stuff, over so many years, that is for me and has been for my own heart, and kind of healing and self-understanding. And it's like most of that I don't want to put out in the world, but it's kind of like when we allow ourselves, I think, as poets to just let it all like hang out, get it down. And Natalie Goldberg, she's written the book Writing Down the Bones and Wild Mind. She talks a lot about, developing a writing practice like any other sort of practice in life. Like if you're a runner or a pianist or whatever, you just practice, you put in time. And she talks about setting a timer and just giving yourself the permission to write whatever is coming down in that allotted amount of time. And then that becomes kind of this raw material from which you can start to pull um, the images and the phrases and the rhythms, you then want to incorporate into a poem.
That's very
So
interesting.
I highly recommend her books, and also Julia Cameron with the who wrote The Artist's Way talks about morning pages in a similar way, and those have both been really helpful to me.
That's really good to, sometimes reading creative writing books. It's helpful because they provide you with very good insights that you might have not heard before. For example, I read Bird by Bird. I
Oh, I
think
love that
I think
book.
a
I
lot of
love
people, a lot
animal
of
movement.
writers read that one. It's like a classic for writers, and it's so good. I mean, it deserves the hype. It's absolutely brilliant. Um, and it does have this kind of encouraging voice of that makes you want to write. And I think what you said about, setting a slot of time for you to write, um, it's essential. Although sometimes it's difficult, I think, well, at least in my case, sometimes things do come out and sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
do you have any sort of rituals or kind of things that put you in the writing mindset per se?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I feel like over the last year or so, I've kind of tried to be like, okay, I want to develop like a writing routine or a writing ritual or whatever. And I mean, full disclosure, I still haven't like found that. I feel like I haven't had, I don't have some like kind of secret sauce to this is what I do and then this happens. But I think maybe like almost paradoxically, I feel like I'm finding more that it's like when I kind of give myself permission to like not do anything, where it's like, I'm taking taking like a long bath or like driving or like watering plants or something that's, kind of just like mundane things. I do feel like and have kind of noticed that like that's almost when like an image or a phrase or an idea will sort of like bubble up and it'll be like, "Ooh, I want to do something with that." Um so yeah, it's almost I feel like I can be very I mean, I have like lots of tendencies of being like perfectionist and sort of like obsessive and like workaholic, and it's almost like I don't think those qualities are really like the most helpful for breeding like inspiration or like, like kind of organic, natural material that then becomes like this sort of life or soul of a poem. So I feel like I'm in a place where it's almost by like trying to not do that becomes like it's I mean, it's sort of like the cliche of like working smarter, not harder, like giving myself space to sort of be like, "Ooh, what's emerging?" And then when something emerges and I'm like, "Ooh, that image feels kind of fun and interesting," then it'll be like, "Okay, I'm gonna go right now." Or be like, I'm jotting this down on the phone on, my little notes app on my phone, and then when I know I have time, I'm gonna go play with that.
Yeah, I love that. It's definitely, I think I quite agree with that. And even myself, whenever I go outside or I'm commuting to work or anytime I go out or do something else, it's in those moments when something comes up in my mind, an
Yeah.
image or a phrase, and it's so true. Sometimes the worst writing comes when I'm forcing myself. And
Right.
so when it comes naturally, it's like magic. So you start
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
very inspired, and
right.
suddenly you have like a whole poem out of nowhere without planning it.
Yeah,
So sometimes it just happens out of nowhere, out of thin air. And you and I think, I mean, I try to stick sometimes to to routines and stuff, because I also like to have like very strict with myself. And but it is true. Sometimes good writing happens in unexpected situations, and I really love that what you just said about like when you're gardening or when you're in the shower, because you find like some inspiration from it, and that's really good. I can actually see a few of those images in your collection.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the poem that, you all publish, "I am safe, I am free," is a poem where I wrote about a moment in the bath where there was this experience and kind of a gift,
Yeah.
of receiving this deep knowing and deep peace. And I kind of feel like part of our work as poets and artists and creatives, and but also just like as like being humans, is to receive. And I think it's really easy, and I know for me I can feel like I need to do, and I need to output, and I need to go and give and all those things. And it's kind of like, oh wait, like actually, um in order for me to do any of the giving or like doing from a place of like wisdom and groundedness, like I have to receive. I have to sort of allow myself to kind of soak in. I'm thinking of the Mary Oliver poem when I am among the trees. Do you know that one?
Yeah. Oh, I love
It's
it. Yes.
such a good one. It's yeah, one of my favorites. And um it's something like I'm not probably not gonna quote it exactly right, but it's simple they say, and you too have come into the world to go easy, to be light and to shine. I don't know if I got that exactly right, but I imagine for me that poem is as sort of this invitation to just be among the trees, like just be among the trees. And then that can be the sort of energy, the life force that nourishes you. So then you can move from that place rather than, I think, what I've done a lot in my life is move from the should, kind of forcing myself,
Mhm.
like exhausted, keep going, pushing that
Yeah.
place.
No, I absolutely see your point, and I think that it's very common for writers who, they want to start their careers, they want to take themselves seriously and hold themselves
Yeah.
accountable, and so in order to do that, sometimes they end up being very strict with themselves. Um, and I think something that you said that's really important is that poetry is it's intrinsically something that is supposed to be made out of you know a good sense of motivation, feelings, sort of like a natural inspiration. It's like a
Yeah.
natural thing to bid.
No, I like all of this a lot. And I feel like I keep going back to poetry for me, and I think I'm hearing this from you too, is it is about the soul. It is about, kind of the eternal, deepest, truest parts of ourselves. And I feel like the poetry that has been the most resonant and alive for me and connecting has been poetry that is really like reaching into the soul and touching these places of real depth and honesty and vulnerability. I'm thinking, I know it, I know when you had emailed me, we talked about, or you said something about like who my favorite poets are. That might be something we would talk about. And in this moment, I'm thinking about, like the first time I read Rilke. It was like this poet that it was like, "Oh my gosh, like you are not talking from like a heady place. You were talking from like a writing from like a lived experience, deep, vast, whoa place, you know?" And it's I mean, I'm really interested in psychology, and that's, you know, kind of what my background is in. And I think it's an interesting sort of dance between, you know, we think about the ego as a part of kind of who we are as humans. And I think sometimes, you know, like different different religions or viewpoints can give the ego a bad rap. It's like the ego is not bad. The ego is essential and we need that to move through the world. And for me at least, the ego isn't really like where I want to be writing poems from. I want to be writing them from like somewhere deeper beyond that. And then the ego, you know, that part of my psyche that can kind of organize and do and manage that, then, you know, that can kind of come online as I'm trying to figure out like, hey, how exactly, where do I want to put this comma, or maybe, or like, um who who can I send this poem out to submit to, like more the more practical things. So yeah, just piggybacking on what you're saying.
You know, this actually reminds me. Sometimes when I'm writing a poem, I might
Mhm.
not finish it, and then I keep thinking about it like in during the day, where I'm when I'm doing all the stuff, and then like something interesting comes up, and I fix it. I mean, I wonder how was the process of writing it,
Yeah.
because for what I understand, you try to appreciate life and wait till some sort of image or inspiration comes to you so that you can write it. Um, so was this the same process, or did it change throughout the writing of this collection?
Yeah. So, you know, I think that because I had done so much writing, you know, for this spiritual memoir, and I was at a place, I guess starting maybe in like the summer 2 years ago, where I was doing The Artist Way, this book by Julia Cameron, which has all these, you know, activities, and she suggests these morning pages, and I mean, I was just writing all the time. It felt like in a way that was not about creating poems, but was about just sort of processing what was happening in my life. And at that time, it was just a really intense season of life. Um, and it was, and then actually, and this is all, it's all, it's been like a very winding, sort of unusual journey. But I started when I was doing The Artist's Way to write these poems that were about the same moment in time, that were there, that were imagined but sort of based loosely on lived experience, that were from the perspective of a grandmother and then from the perspective of a child. And it was sort of this practice of what's it like to sort of have this grandmotherly mind and sort of a grandmotherly soul, like connecting with something. And then what's it like to have that kind of child mind soul connecting, looking at a moment. And so, but I was writing these poems essentially not from like my own kind of integrated perspective. I was kind of taking on these characters. And part of why I was doing that was I was working as a therapist at the time, and I was not um, necessarily comfortable or confident with putting my own work out there. So I was sort of writing from these characters. And then I guess maybe that winter, I really started to kind of get to this clear place where I knew that I wanted to really focus on my work as a poet. And I was reading a lot. I was then sort of like starting to send some work out, like these grandmother poems. Um and And then, I mean, really in putting the book together, it became a lot of this process of being like, okay, of all this stuff I've written over many years, where are the poems alive? And kind of going back into old material, like I was saying kind of before, and being like, ooh, this paragraph, it actually wants to be a poem. And I mean, this is where, I joke with my fiance, Davey, who I dedicated the book to. Like, I mean, I am like extremely obsessive. Like I can like work on something nonstop. Like I would be like, he'd be like, we'd be like watching TV or something, like at the end of the day, and I'd be like on my computer and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm done editing. I'm done like working on these poems for the day." And then he'd like look over at me and be like, "Are you tweaking?" Like, and I'd be like, "Okay, maybe." Anyway, that's a long way to say, while yes, there was this and is this kind of intention of like receiving the poems, I also was like kind of channeling my workaholic tendencies where it was like, I've got this idea. I want to shape it. That's not quite right. And then, it's like staying up late at night or like in between like
Mhm.
therapy sessions. I'm
The
like
rabbit
tweaking
hole. Yeah.
poems. Yeah. So I don't want to give some romantic notion that I'm just like, oh, receiving, these poems.
Yeah.
But I did have a structure of the book in mind. And the book started as a chat book where I had like 15 poems. I was able to connect with the poet James Cruz, who really was kind of a mentor to me, and he really encouraged me. He was kind of like, I kind of feel like this chat book might want to be a whole book. And because I had written that spiritual memoir, I had already developed this concept of writing a book. This was how that memoir was structured in the arc of a breath. So I knew I wanted to have part one inhale, part two hold, part three exhale. And so then it kind of became, once I had the chat book, I sort of was like, oh, I can divvy these poems. I know which poems are more in the inhale section, hold, exhale. And then it almost became a process of like filling in where it was like, oh, I need more poems that sort of speak to this kind of reclaiming my creative voice and kind of the exhale themes. And I honestly had a lot of inhale poems. I had a fair number of hold poems, and then it became like a lot of the exhale poems were more of those kind of what I was in touch with or sort of processing or moving through in real time rather than like going back to the past and pulling like the old writing. So that's a very
Mhm.
winding answer.
No, I loved it. You really touched upon a lot of very interesting um, structures of your book, and I didn't know this was initially a chapbook, and
Mhm.
I'm really glad you made it a book because the whole collection is just fantastic, and I really really love the fact that you divided this into inhaling and then hold and exhale, because I said it really sounds like something that you hear in meditation when the structure is trying to help you breathe correctly, and you have to inhale for a few seconds, then hold it, and then exhale. And it's kind of like this process of, for each of these parts you have to do something different. And I wonder, just very quickly before we go into your poetry, what is, according to you, or in you know while creating this poetry collection, how do you see the inhaling as opposed to the holding and the exhaling? How would you explain that process in terms of um, poetry?
Yeah. So for me, the inhale is a gathering, is a taking in of life. And so for the process of writing this book, I was really interested in the inhale section um being composed of poems that were really related to kind of my own family of origin and sort of my um and my origin in a way, where I'm from, sort of the voices around me that have infused me, that I've kind of taken in. And then the hold section. So I will say I've always found, I mean, ever since I was a little kid, like the idea of like holding my breath and holding, you as a kid, you like would do those competitions where you'd like, who can hold their breath longest underwater? And those feel like super stressful to me. So hold has always felt for me, and even as I've like learned breath work over the years, I've noticed that like being asked to hold my breath has kind of had an automatic response for me of anxiety, of tension. And so that was really what I was leaning into in the section of hold in the book. And more so, I mean, hold in the book really, really leans into uh deep loss and disillusionment, and also insecurity, and just the, I mean, in many ways, sort of these shadow aspects of human experience, and these parts of being human that, I mean, you were sort of alluding to this um right at the beginning, of like, we all have darkness in our lives. We all have darkness as a part of who we are. And the hold, I almost envision it in my mind as kind of this moment of suspension, the dark night of the soul, where it's sort of like, oh my gosh, is this hold going to last forever? And the fear of being like, what if I'm never going to get out of this hold? And then the exhale, really speaks to, for me, this sort of release and a softening. When you exhale, there's a relaxation of the belly, a surrender. And actually, the book begins with the epigraph, that is the word. These are the words from the person who's considered to be the father of modern yoga, Krishnamacharya. And he says, inhale, God approaches you. Hold the inhale, God remains with you. Exhale, and you approach God. And so in many ways, the exhale was sort of, the section of the book was speaking to my experiences of, okay, what is true to me in this season of life, at least as far as my own spirituality, kind of how do I connect to the divine? And I was really leaning into the exhales of sort of these images of the divine feminine, and kind of questioning sort of patriarchal values of this father god, or even sort of like rigidity in educational systems. And yeah, so that quotation was very anchoring, and that was also something that was anchoring me when I originally wrote this whole spiritual memoir. And I feel like, I think going forward, and sort of in this next book I'm kind of, dreaming up right now, it's like having some sort of arc or structure in a poetry collection feels really orienting to me. So I was really grateful to have that quotation. And I will also say the quotation, the I only include the first 3 lines of this quotation that's attributed to Krishnamacharya, and the last line of this quotation is, hold the exhalation and surrender to God. And in many ways, I'm like, I feel like that will be a life work book, like that's a whole
Let's
other
not get to that
process.
yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Thank you for listening to the Poetry Lighthouse. If you liked this episode, don't forget to share and subscribe to our podcast. You can also visit our website, thepoetrylighthouse.com, where you can read and submit your works of poetry and short stories. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to keep updated. This is the end of the episode. Thanks again, and see you next time.